Inks. There are three factors to be taken into consideration in calligraphy: ink, paper and pen, or nib. Better calligraphy is achieved when these three are working well together. So let's start off with inks. There are two different types of inks: inks made with aniline dyes and inks made with pigment. Now, fountain pen ink is made with aniline dyes, and this Japanese ink I have here is made with pigment. Now, the problem with aniline dyes is that they fade in sunlight, so you mustn't use them for anything which needs to last more than, say, a couple of years. Always use a pigment or carbon based ink. Fibre tip pens contain aniline dyes, so it's wise to avoid them for anything important. Having said this, I believe Zig pens have light fast inks in them, but I haven't tried them in that respect. So fountain pen ink is made from aniline dyes because the particles are very fine and they pass through a fountain pen without clogging it. And as a matter of interest, black fountain pen ink is not black at all. It's a mixture of various colours of aniline dyes. So let's just have a look at that for a second, shall we? I've got some wet tissue here, and I'm just going to put a couple of drops of fountain pen ink on to it, see what happens. So what I'll do is I'll just leave this for a little while, and then I will rephotograph it later on when it's spread out into the paper. So you can see that the ink has now broken down into its constituent colours. There's yellow, blue, purple, orange. Another make, such as Quink, will probably have slightly different colours, but they mix together to make black. For the purpose of practice only, I recommend that you use a fountain pen ink such as Parker or Quink or any of those, because it flows quite nicely, I find, and doesn't clog at all. The only one I don't suggest you use is William Mitchell's fountain pen ink, which I find is rather too fluid, and it spreads into the fibres of the paper and tends to spread out. So what you're after in calligraphy is sharpness, and you'll get it with most fountain pen inks, but not the William Mitchells. So these are the dye-based inks. Now when it comes to doing more permanent work, we should use a pigment ink. This is a carbon-based ink, so it's particles of carbon made from soot, basically, suspended in a liquid with a binder. And this is a Japanese ink, and any of the Japanese and Chinese inks are good. Even the cheapest ones of them are much better than anything you'll get in the on the market. It's a minefield, inks, and inks are in varying qualities. So if your ink is no good, it can be very unsettling and off-putting for a beginner. You don't know whether it's supposed to be, you assume it's supposed to be adequate, but in fact quite often they're not. So I'm going to tell you a few things to avoid. First of all, avoid any ink that calls itself waterproof, because a waterproof ink contains shellac or acrylic, which gives it a waterproof surface. So basically for pen and wash drawing, so you can do a pen drawing, then put a wash of watercolour over the top, and it won't move the ink underneath. You don't want this really, because it clogs the pen. What you want is a non-waterproof ink. So the waterproof inks, the Windsor Newton one, Windsor Newton seems to be the most widely available product in the world. The Windsor Newton ink has a picture of a spider in a top hat on the bottle, so avoid that at all costs. Having said that, they have a non-waterproof, that's what you want, a non-waterproof, but the Windsor Newton non-waterproof is, in my opinion, very poor, and it's sort of very weak and slimy, and it's not very nice to write with at all, so avoid Windsor Newton non-waterproof. Having said that, liquid Indian inks, probably the best one on the market I think is Higgins Eternal. A lot of calligraphers use Higgins Eternal, and it's very good, but just remember what I said, that the Chinese and Japanese inks, even the cheapest ones, are better than a lot of the Western inks. When it comes to coloured inks, there's a lot on the market. Windsor Newton again produce a range of coloured waterproof inks, which you should avoid. I mean, firstly, they're transparent colours, so if you put red on top of blue, it'll be purple, which you might want to do. But again, as waterproof inks, they're not very good for calligraphers. De La Rowney also do a range of coloured inks called Cali, which I've never tried, I have to admit, because they call themselves acrylic inks, and I would think that anything calling itself acrylic would have an acrylic binder, which would clog the pen. So I've avoided them because I prefer to use designer's gouache, also made by Windsor and Newton. The company's everywhere, isn't it? Windsor Newton designer's gouache is good, I think, and I use it just thinned down with water, but I'll talk about that at another time. So to sum it up, use dye-based inks for practice, which are perfectly adequate, but don't use them for final work. Use a good carbon-based ink. There are a lot of inks on the market, you just got to try them, see what happens. Okay.